Today's case is one that puzzled investigators from the start. Its bizarre beginning led to one of Australia's largest scale searches ever, yet still, it was like finding a needle in a haystack. The disappearance of this little girl gripped the nation, with everyone doing their part to find her. Yet it was a stroke of luck and one small piece of evidence that led to the harrowing discovery of what happened to 4-year-old Cleo Smith. But before we get into all of the details, let's talk about something positive that could never fail to make you smile: your dog. I have 2 little fluff balls, Willow, who's a 5-year-old Maltese mix, and a Pomeranian puppy named Dennis. All I want is to give them the healthiest diet I can, but somehow I ended up with 2 very picky dogs who are so particular about the food they are given, and that is why I love Sundays. Sundays is a dog food company that offers air-dried, human-grade food that is easy to store and serve. They are on a mission to make feeding your dogs premium nutrition as easy as possible. I've actually been using Sundays for almost a year now and pay for the subscription myself, and now there is no turning back. My dogs wouldn't let me if I tried. Sundays offers human-grade food from start to finish. You only find real food ingredients that you can not only recognize and pronounce, but that you can eat yourself. Each recipe is made with 100% meat, muscle, organs, and superfoods, and 0 synthetics or artificial preservatives. The back of the bag tells you everything you need to know about what's inside. They come in ready-to-serve meals, eliminating the need for refrigeration, preparation, defrosting, or concerns about contaminants. It's shelf-stable, travel-ready, and again, full of nutrients. It's easy and healthy, which is very difficult to find in pre-made dog food. Sunday's food is air-dried, which gives it a soft, jerky-like texture, which my dogs are obsessed with, while preserving its nutrition and flavor, unlike kibble, which loses many of its vitamins and minerals due to high-temperature cooking. Like I said, both my dogs are very picky, and when I used to give them kibble, they'd just stare at me, and their bowls would sit there untouched the rest of the day. But now that I give them Sundays, they both finish their breakfasts and dinners, and I know that they're getting the nutrients they need to stay healthy. So give your dog a chance to try Sundays and watch them fall in love. You can get 50% off your first order at Sundays at sundaysfordogz.com/RachelShannon, or use my code RachelShannon at checkout. Once again, that's sundaysfordogz.com/RachelShannon for 50% off your first order, or use my code RachelShannon at checkout. Thank you again so much to Sundays for partnering with me on today's video. With that being said, let's get into the case. Cleo Smith was living with her mother, Ellie Smith, and her stepfather, Jake Glidden, and her little sister in Carnarvon, Australia. Carnarvon is a coastal town with a population of about 5,500 people. This is where both Ellie and Jake grew up, spending their summers swimming in the lagoons at the Blowholes campground in Western Australia. This is a popular destination for tourists and campers attracted by the blowholes, a natural phenomenon where ocean swells force water through the sea caves and up out of the holes in the rocks. So it's no surprise that as adults, Ellie and Jake wanted to take their kids there to experience the same things that they got to as kids. By Friday, October 15th, 2021, they packed their camping gear, and Ellie, Jake, then 4-year-old Cleo, and her sister, 7-month-old Isla, made their way to the Blowholes campgrounds. The drive was only about an hour, and they arrived by 6 p.m. that evening. They set up camp in the sandy grounds as they watched the sun set before making dinner and heading to bed. The family all shared one tent, but there was a divider on the inside so that Ellie and Jake were sleeping on one side and the girls were sleeping on the other. By around 1:30 a.m., Cleo woke her parents up asking her for some water, which Ellie gave her, before tucking Cleo back into bed. From there, the family of 4 slept peacefully as they listened to the waves crashing and the sound of nature buzzing. By 6 a.m., Ellie woke up once again, knowing that baby Isla would be up and hungry for her bottle. She opened the internal divider to look into the other side, where she saw Isla in her cot, where she had been asleep all night next to Cleo's mattress. But Cleo herself was not in her bed, and neither was her sleeping bag. Not only that, but the zipper that led outside the tent was left unzipped about 3/4 of the way open, and there was a mysterious footprint just outside the tent. Of course, this immediately startled Ellie, who woke up Jake so they could start searching for Cleo. They were absolutely panicked right off the bat because not only did they not hear anything, but they knew that there was no way that Cleo would have walked off on her own. Not only that, but they quickly noticed that there were no drag marks from her sleeping bag. Cleo was a 4-year-old little girl. There was no way she would have been able to carry that entire sleeping bag without dragging it on the ground. And if she had dragged it out, it would have left marks in the sand. Plus, the tent had been left unzipped, again, 3/4 the way open, to a height that Cleo would not have been able to reach herself. Their minds immediately went to the worst case scenario. As they frantically searched around the campgrounds, other campers joined in to help. But still, Cleo was nowhere to be found. Ellie called the police by 6:30 a.m., who arrived shortly after. Within minutes, officers knew that they needed to take this case seriously. They put up caution tape around the tent itself and created a roadblock searching any and all vehicles that were entering or leaving the area. As that was happening, more and more people joined in on the search efforts. Family and friends made their way to the area, volunteers came out in droves, and more officers all worked together to search along the rugged coastal area. They brought in divers to search the ocean and a helicopter to search from above. A specialty search and rescue team was also brought in along with heat detection equipment. At this time, officers felt that she could have been abducted from the site, but as the searches continued, they were still considering the possibility that Cleo could have walked off. Even though this didn't seem all that likely, they couldn't rule anything out at first. They estimated that it was possible that Cleo could have walked up to 5.2 kilometers in that amount of time, so that is about the size of the area they were searching. By the second day of the search, October 17th, police started deploying drones to survey the area. There was a 100-person task force formed of officers, plus the Australian Defence Force Army also aided in the search efforts by this time. They were desperate to find Cleo and were very concerned for her safety and well-being. Like I said, anything was possible at this point. Back in Carnarvon, local volunteers and friends of the family were putting up flyers with Cleo's information. Ellie also took to Facebook to beg everyone she knew to please keep on the lookout for her daughter. She had been last seen in her pink pajamas with flowers and butterflies on them. They also released a photo of her sleeping bag, which was green and red. Anyone with information needs to come forward so they can bring their precious baby home. For the 2 days that followed, the searches continued and the areas in which they were searching got larger and larger, but they just were not finding her. By now, the possibility that Cleo was abducted was seeming more and more likely. There was no way that Cleo could have walked off and made it this far without anyone finding a single sign of her. With the searches that were happening, officers also started questioning everyone who had been at the campsite that weekend, as well as collecting DNA samples from them. One common story they heard from a few different campers and someone that was driving in the area at this time was that between 3 and 3:30 a.m. on the morning of October 16th, they heard or saw a car making a screeching turn at the intersection of Blowholes Road before heading south onto Northwest Coastal Highway. This told officers that there could have been a suspicious vehicle in that area, and this was right around the time that Cleo would probably have been kidnapped. By Tuesday, October 19th, after finding still no sign of Cleo, police felt that it was time for Ellie and Jake to make a public appeal for information. They sat for an interview with TV news crews where they begged for their daughter's safe return. They said that these 4 days have been excruciating. They have absolutely no control over the situation and have started to feel hopeless. They said that Cleo is a delicate, beautiful little girl with a big heart and an amazing sense of humor. She loved to collect rocks, play dress-up, and wear makeup. She loved wearing princess dresses, with Ellie calling her her little princess. After this public plea aired, police announced that the state would now be offering a $1 million reward to anyone who provided information that led to locating Cleo or those responsible for her disappearance. Around this same time, after that interview came out, a lot of people were suspecting Ellie and Jake for being involved in their daughter's disappearance. Even the initial body cam footage, when they were talking to Ellie about the disappearance, she seemed a little bit calm, a lot more calm than you would think a mother would be. But that just goes to show that you truly cannot judge anybody on how they act after going through some sort of traumatic event like this. I do also want to note, I didn't mention this earlier, but after that public interview aired with Ellie and Jake, and after they were starting to get some public scrutiny, police did make the announcement that they were being very cooperative and they are not considered suspects in this investigation. Either way, by the 7th day of her disappearance, the land searches for the areas surrounding the campsite came to a close. This obviously devastated Ellie and Jake, but by this point, detectives were confident that Cleo was most likely kidnapped and was probably not near the campsite any longer. If she had just walked off, there is no question that they would have found her by now. Now, after the searches near the campsite closed, detectives were focused on the town nearest the campsite, Carnarvon. They searched all around the town, going to any and all local businesses, asking if they had any tips, and for CCTV footage that they may have had from the days prior. Everyone in the area wanted to help in any way they could, but again, it was like finding a needle in a haystack. Officers did everything they could to encourage the community to keep an eye out for this little girl. That is a part of this case that I really want to emphasize, how much effort was really put into finding Cleo, as well as how much police relied on the public to help them. Now, like I said just a minute ago, detectives received multiple reports of a car leaving the Blowholes campsite at around 3 a.m. the morning Cleo disappeared. Of course, police made a public statement asking for the driver of this vehicle to come forward, but no one did. They also started combing through hundreds of hours worth of CCTV footage from the surrounding areas and that highway, but this led them no closer to identifying the driver of the car. Once the CCTV footage came up empty, they started analyzing satellite imagery and data collected from the cell phone towers from around the area. Then, by the late night hours of November 12th, 18 days into their search, police received a tip regarding a suspicious vehicle in the area of the Blowhole campsites. We don't know exactly what the tip was, but it gave them a lot more information than what they originally had regarding the car. In addition to that, police officers found that there was a phone that pinged off the tower right near the campsite at 3:05 a.m. This was a huge deal because most of that area was wilderness. No cell phone service for miles around. But this cell phone tower gave that specific campsite pretty good service, so they knew that this ping had to belong to someone who was visiting the campsite at that time. This ping also showed that the person pinged and then turned their phone off until the phone pinged at a different location after leaving the campsite, so they were only there for a short period of time. That, in addition to the tip relating to the car, is what brought this entire case together and what led to the discovery of what happened to 4-year-old little Cleo. By 12:45 a.m., now going into November 3rd, this information led officers to a locked-up house in Carnarvon. They immediately busted inside, and quickly after entering the home, they were stunned at what they saw. The inside of the home was filled with dolls. Then they found a little girl alone in a room playing with a toy car. At first, she was terrified. She didn't know who these people were just busting into her room like that. But officers made themselves known, trying to speak as gently and kindly as possible as they asked for her name. And in that moment, the little girl said, "My name is Cleo." 4-year-old little Cleo was found alive and unharmed. Officers would later describe a feeling of euphoria, knowing that their searches are coming to an end, knowing that they will soon get to bring this little girl back to her family. The audio of that first interaction with officers was captured on audio and has been released. I will play it for you now.
I got it. Hey, Bobby.
Spin the camera in.
Hey, come here. Come here. I got you, Bobby.
What's your name?
You're alright.
What's your name? What's your name, sweetheart? My name is Cleo.
Your name is Cleo.
Hello, Cleo. Yes.
Cleo, my name's Cameron. How are you? Are you okay? We're going to take you to see your mummy and daddy, okay? Is that good?
By just after 1 a.m. that same morning, Ellie woke up to her phone ringing. For the prior 18 days, every time her phone rang, she was hopeful that it would bring news that her daughter was coming home. But each and every time, she was left disappointed. But not this time. When she answered the phone, the detective on the other end said, "We've got someone here that wants to speak with you," and handed the phone to Cleo, who was safely in the hands of the officers who had just rescued her from that home. I can't even imagine the overwhelming feelings of relief and excitement and joy that Ellie felt in that moment, hearing her daughter's voice, now knowing that she was okay. The home she was found in was actually just a few miles from where Ellie and the family lived, so they were reunited right away. Then, by 4:15 a.m. that same morning, Western Australia police made the announcement that Cleo had been found safe.
That in the early hours of this morning, the Western Australian Police Force rescued Cleo Smith. Cleo is alive and well. A police team broke their way into a locked house in Carnarvon at about 1 a.m. They found little Cleo in one of those rooms. One of the officers picked her up into his arms and asked her, "What's your name?" She said, "My name is Cleo." Cleo was reunited with her parents a short time later. This is the outcome we all hoped and prayed for. It's the outcome we've achieved because of some incredible police work, and I want to thank Cleo's parents, the Western Australian community, and all of the volunteers.
What did she say to you?
Well, I asked her what her name was. One of the guys jumped in front of me and picked her up, and I just wanted to be absolutely sure that, it certainly looked like Cleo. I wanted to be absolutely sure it was her, so I said, "What's your name?" And she didn't answer, and I said, "What's your name?" She didn't answer again, so I asked her a third time, and then she looked at me and she said, "My name's Cleo," and it was, and that was it. So then we turned around and walked out of that house, and not long after that, got into the car, and the officer I was with, Detective Sergeant Hutchinson, who is the family liaison officer, called Cleo's parents and said, "We've got someone here that wants to speak to you." And it was, a wonderful feeling to be able to make that call. So,
What was their reaction?
oh, you can imagine, just absolute surprise, and they were ecstatic. So,
Once again, a feeling of relief spread across the entire community who had been holding their breath as they waited for answers in this little girl's disappearance. At this point, you're probably wondering who is responsible for kidnapping Cleo and locking her in that home, and you might be wondering what happened to her while she was there. Well, like I said, police found the location based on that singular cell phone ping from that cell tower. That cell phone number led investigators into looking into a 36-year-old man, Terrence Darrell Kelly. After looking into him, he quickly rose to the top of their list as their prime suspect. Just before making their way into his home, by 11:24 on November 3rd, police pulled Terrence over as they saw him driving his car away from the house. At that time, police actually hadn't yet been planning to arrest him. They were going to interview him that following day. But they knew that something was up based on how erratically he was driving. They knew in that moment that they needed to detain him while they searched his home to prevent any possible chance of him fleeing. Of course, though, after discovering Cleo in his home, he was officially arrested and charged for the kidnapping of this 4-year-old little girl. I'm not exactly sure when this information was discovered, but at some point after Terrence's arrest, detectives uncovered a lot of information about his past, what led him to kidnapping Cleo, and what he did to her while she was there. Terrence Darrell Kelly is an Indigenous man born in Narlama country in the Pilbara town of Wickman, Australia, but he grew up in the Midwest area of Western Australia. It was said that Terrence faced significant challenges and trauma as a child. According to one source, many Aboriginal people suffer from higher rates of incarceration. They are 22 times more likely to end up in prison than the non-native populations, and a 2018 study found that almost every child in detention had severely impacted brain function. This is partly attributed to trauma experienced as a result of colonization in that area. Terrence Kelly, unfortunately, is part of that statistic. It was reported that he was born to parents who were addicted to drugs and alcohol, and as a baby, he was even fed alcohol in his bottles. By the age of 2, his parents completely abandoned him, leaving him in the care of a maternal aunt. As he grew up, he had speech and hearing issues, probably at least partially due to the alcohol that he was given as an infant. Once in school, he faced social isolation due to his disabilities, though he refused to wear hearing aids because the other kids would bully him if he did. His home life wasn't too different. He was surrounded by violent uncles who absolutely terrified him. By the age of 12, he was wetting the bed and facing severe mental health issues. He was hospitalized for suicidal behavior before he was even a teenager. By high school, he was exhibiting violent and disruptive behavior himself, which resulted in his expulsion his senior year. At that point, he was moved from his aunt's home back in with his father, who physically beat him for causing trouble at school. As an adult, he was diagnosed with complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, and possibly fetal alcohol syndrome. He was also said to have paranoid, schizoid, borderline, and narcissistic personality traits. At some point, we don't know exactly when, but Terrence also started using drugs such as methamphetamines. Terrence would go on to tell officers that by the early morning hours of October 16, 2021, he was high on meth, headed towards the Blowholes campsite with intentions of stealing a handbag to get some money. At some point between 3 and 4:40 a.m., he unzipped the family's tent looking to score, but instead, he saw 4-year-old Cleo sleeping soundly in her sleeping bag. In that moment, he decided to grab her and take her with him. When he was there, his cell phone was on, but as he was leaving the campsite, he turned it off, probably so that he couldn't be tracked. But as he was leaving, as soon as he left the campsite, he turned the phone back on. According to a psychologist who examined him, the motive for Terrence taking Cleo was apparently because he had always wanted a little girl who he could dress up and play with. He had created this fantasy world in his head, which included children and women, all who did whatever he wanted. For the 3 weeks that she was with him, Cleo was locked inside a room with just a mattress on the floor. He first tried tying her up and restraining her hands, feet, and mouth to a chair with tape, but she was, quote, a bit of a fighter. He said that he wanted to be nice to Cleo, but there were times that he had to smack her or roughen her up for being bossy or for asking him for chocolate. He never wanted to hurt her badly, but he needed for her to stop with the attitude. That's basically what he said. Whenever Cleo would cry out or scream, Terrence would drown out the sound by playing music on the bathroom radio very loudly. Then there were times where Terrence had to leave his home, at which times he would leave her alone in that home for hours on end. He took part in various work meetings, went shopping, did arts and crafts activities, and visited relatives, all with this little girl locked up in a room. This is what Cleo suffered for 18 excruciating, terrifying days until she was finally rescued. After Terrence's arrest, he was charged with child abduction, which carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. After spending a few months in jail by January 2020, Terrence did actually plead guilty to his charges. At a sentencing hearing, the judge considered all of the mitigating and aggravating factors when deciding on the sentence. Of course, Terrence's childhood trauma and mental defects played a role in why he did what he did, but so did his drug use. Terrence's attorney argued that given his diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome, it can be argued that he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't understand the consequences of his actions. But the judge came back and argued that yes, Terrence may have wanted a child of his own, but she doesn't think that he would have acted on these desires if it wasn't for his drug use. She believes that it was the drugs, not delusion, that caused him to steal a child. She went on to say, quote, but for the use of illicit drugs impacting on your complex personality dysfunction and neurodevelopmental issues, you would have been far less likely to have ever stolen a child. She also pointed out the severe psychological impact his actions have had on his victim and her family. Cleo suffered from nightmares for years and wasn't able to sleep for weeks after she was returned home. Her parents were terrified and exhausted while she was missing, and then once she was returned home, they felt disgusted after hearing what she went through. It was incredibly painful to hear that he roughed her up, all while her parents were right down the street, having no idea what was happening. Ellie and Jake have also described being too scared to sleep, fearing that their daughter will be taken from them again. Cleo's abduction has left lifelong trauma that will scar each and every family member for the rest of their lives, and that is something that needs to be considered when sentencing the man responsible. In the end, Terrence Kelly was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months behind bars for his charges, with eligibility for parole after 11, which is far below the maximum sentence, but I guess his own rough upbringing was factored into the decision. But to me, it seems like his upbringing outweighed the trauma and pain that Cleo and her family are left with, which always just makes me so freaking angry. But at the end of the day, this case does have a positive ending. She went through something so horrific, but at least she came home, which, given the situation, is all we can hope for. Cleo went on to join ballet and tap dancing, which she loved. As she got older, she also did gymnastics, and I believe she still does. She started school, which was also such a positive thing for her. It seems like the family is doing their best to heal and move on from this horrifying tragedy, not letting their fear prevent them from living. All I can do is hope that Cleo can heal and live a fulfilled, happy life, which is exactly what it seems she is doing. But as of right now, that is all of the information I have on today's case. You all heard my thoughts, but now I want to hear yours. What do you think of the police response to Cleo's disappearance? What do you think of Terrence and his apparent motives? Do you think his sentence was enough? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn the notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!